Hi people, it's me, Anja. My pronouns are she and her, and welcome back to my channel for a new recent reads video. The first book on this list is called The Many Half-Lived Lives of Sam Sylvester. This book is a YA contemporary mystery because it follows a young, autistic, non-binary main character who's trying to solve a 30-year-old mystery. I like this book, but I didn't absolutely love it, so basically I have mixed feelings for it, and let's talk about them. First of all, on the one hand, I like the representation. The autism representation and the queer representation was nice, and it was casual, and it was wonderful, and it was so, lovely, and so, well represented from what I can understand. You know what I mean? And from what I can tell, you know? Anyway, aside from that, I didn't really love the mystery that much. I typically don't read mystery books that often because I typically don't find them to be immersive, or I find them to be predictable. And this book was neither of those two things, which was unfortunate. I'm glad that it wasn't predictable, but I wish that it had been immersive, and I just feel like the mystery storyline in this book was the most underdeveloped, which is interesting because it was the main storyline. You know what I mean? The mystery drove the story forward, but it had the least amount of action in it, which was weird and unexpected, but I liked, all the side plots. I liked the romance, I liked the friendships, I liked the relationship between the main character and their dad. That was sweet. I just didn't really care for the mystery, and honestly, I felt like the ending was cheap, especially the villain's motivations, not to spoil anything. So anyway, with all of that said, I rated this book 3 stars, and I wouldn't exactly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Con Richie. This book is a YA contemporary following a pair of teenagers who are trying to work together to save their parents' shops, while also falling in love with each other. For those who don't know, this book is written by the same author of Meet Cute Diary, which is why I had very high expectations for it, and why it was on my May TBR. This book thankfully lived up to those expectations and exceeded them, and we love to see it. Although I will say at first, about 5 chapters in, I couldn't tell the characters apart. But then 8 to 13 chapters in, I could, because I fell in love with the characters individually, and I just fell in love with them as they fell in love with each other. I hope that made sense. The characters were so well developed and so distinct, and I was so attached to them, and I love that. Emery Lee creates and crafts characters literally so well, and I will continue to support them in the future because their writing is absolutely so engaging. This book truly takes the cake, which is an intended food pun, over Meet Cute Diary, and I would highly recommend it because it was so well developed. The romance was so cute, and it was absolutely so lovely. The plot was so engaging, and it was absolutely so intriguing. This book is so good, and with all of that said, I rated it 4 stars, and like I just mentioned, I would highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called The Ghosts of Rose Hill. This book is a YA magical realism contemporary, and it follows a young biracial Jewish girl as she discovers ghosts and forgotten Jewish cemeteries. This book was so good, and I really enjoyed it, so I rated it 4 stars. First of all, the free-verse format was so lyrical, and it was absolutely so pretty and so vivid. The plot was so engaging, and it was absolutely so intriguing. Even the romance was so cute, and it was so lovely, even though I knew from the beginning how it would end, if that makes any sense. So even though the ending was predictable, I still fell in love with it, because sometimes I don't typically fall in love with romances or with characters or with certain storylines or whatever if I know how it's going to end. But this story was so immersive that I didn't necessarily pay attention to the predictability of that specific storyline. Anyway, the characters were so well developed and so distinct. This book was so well done. The world building was so engaging, and it was absolutely so vivid. So anyway, with all that said, I rated this book 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Breathe and Count Back from 10. This book is a YA contemporary following a young Peruvian girl with hip dysplasia who wants to be a mermaid, not in a fantastical sense or anything like that. I mean she wants to be a mermaid at a swimming pool job type of deal. Anyway, she also wants to take control of her life. This book was so good. I really enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it. First of all, the disability representation was absolutely so wonderful, and it was so lovely. If I'm not mistaken, this book is the very first book that I've read where the main character is both disabled and a person of color, because the majority of the books I've read with disabled main characters, they've all been white before, so I really enjoyed the intersectionality representation in this book because it was literally so well done. Second of all, the plot was so engaging, it was absolutely so intriguing. Third of all, the romance was so well developed and it was so cute. It was absolutely so lovely. The depression representation in the main character's love interest was also done so well. The friendships were so lovely, and the sister relationships and the family dynamics, like between the main character and her parents, were so authentic and so well developed. This book deserves all of its hype and so much more. So with that, I would highly recommend it. The last book on this list is called Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This book is a YA fantasy following a young girl who's pitting herself against the most powerful and mortal god in the realm in order to free her mom. Although that doesn't happen until like the last third of the book. I rated this book 3 stars. It was initially on my January TBR, and I DNF'd it actually in January initially, but then I decided to give it a second chance because everybody was raving about it and talking about how much they loved it. So I decided to give it a second chance to see what I was missing out on, only to discover that I'm not actually missing out on anything, because this book is not that great, and honestly it's overrated, and I will not be reading a sequel, and here's why. Like I mentioned, the thing that's happened in the synopsis that I just summarized for you does not happen until the last third of the book, which means that when I was reading the first 2/3 of the book, I was thinking to myself, all this stuff is so irrelevant, and I don't understand why the author is wasting so much time talking about this stuff. Now that I've finished the book, I understand why the first 2/3 of the book are like relevant to like the rest of the story. I just wish that like what is described in the synopsis started much earlier. Like maybe halfway through this book would have been fine, just not like in the last third, which means that everything like in the last third, since the book was ending, wrapped up pretty fast. And I know that there's a sequel coming next year or something like that. Like I mentioned, I won't be reading it, but honestly I don't understand what will happen in the sequel because this book pretty much wrapped up everything. But anyway, I didn't care for the romance. The world building, I will say though, was great and it was immersive, and the plot itself was engaging and it was intriguing, but like I didn't really care for the characters or the romance or like any of the friendships or anything like that. So anyway, with all of that said, I rated this book 3 stars. It was a big disappointment. I don't recommend it, and I will not be reading the sequel. So, in conclusion, the 3 4-star books on this list, Cafe Con Richie, Breathe and Count Back from 10, and The Ghost of Rose Hill, I would definitely highly recommend. But as for the other 2 books on this list, I definitely would not recommend because I personally didn't really enjoy them. So anyway, with that said, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the cheese emoji if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks for watching, subscribe to my channel if you're new, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!